Hotel. Welcome to Journey in the Self. I'm your host, Sarah. The year has come to an end and a new year is upon us, at least on the Gregorian calendar. As I was contemplating what to speak on tonight, it occurred to me that instead of continuing on the Trump unveiling path, that it would be a good time to reflect on where things are and on the world stage, how that has unfolded, the significance of this period of time in the year, and the symbolism behind it, and how that can provide us some guidance as to how to approach going into the new year. When I was meditating this morning, after I had completed my meditation, I received the insight that, and I posted it on Facebook, that the circumstances that we see in the external world right now are a reflection and culmination of the circumstances that are going on in the inner worlds of everyone on the planet. So, what we're experiencing is the projection of the collective consciousness of humanity playing itself out on the world stage. Needless to say, that indicates that there is a lot of turmoil going on within the consciousness of humanity that has resulted in the manifestation of the challenges and turmoil that we see manifested in the physical world. We know from the teachings of our ancestors that as is above, so is below, that we are microcosms of the universe, and that there is consistency in manifestation. There's consistency in the makeup of us as individual human beings, and that is consistent with the makeup of the universe. And the symbolism behind that is demonstrated in the fact that when our Kemetic ancestors built pyramids and temples, they often were made to replicate the patterns that exist in the human body, the same type of ratios that exist within the body. The symbolism of it was that the temples represent the body, which is the abode of God. And so our bodies resent that, represent that. So there's consistency throughout the world, and they are reflections of each other. Of course, we know that we are spirit beings, and that's where we come from, and that the physical world was created and is a projection of reality by God or the Creator. But we know that that's impermanent. We also know that we are individual representations of the divinity, of the divine. And as a result, we create in similar manner, we in the same fashion. The universe, the physical universe came into existence from the creative utterance, first from the mind of God, the creative utterance, Om, the vibration of which everything in the universe is part and consists of. And that began the differentiation process of things into solid form and the different forms that exist in the universe. So, as individuals, we create in the same fashion, knowingly or unknowingly, we create, consciously or unconsciously, we create based upon what we are focusing on in our minds, what we are continuously thinking. So again, the what we see in the world and what we experience individually is a reflection and dictated by what is going on in our minds. But we also operate on a collective scale and contribute to a collective vibration of humanity. And so the overall environment extended from each individual's environment that they have created, we create a collective consciousness which influences the events that unfold on the world scale. Thus, again, we have a lot of conflict, we have imbalance on many scales, economic imbalances, resource imbalances, imbalances in relationships, in our interactions with each other. We have confusion in terms of how to manifest who we are. I may elaborate on that a little later. It reflects in the nature of our government, who controls it, and it's also dictated by where we are in the cycle of time. So, in addition to how humanity ends up influencing the unfoldment of events on the planetary scale, it's also dictated by the cycles of time where patterns recur in a cycle. And that relates to the seasons, which we'll come back to shortly. In the Indian culture, they refer to the cycles of time as the yugas. In Kemetic, we look at it from the ages that are manifested from the precession of the equinoxes. And there's a great cycle called the Great Year, which are the 12 ages of the zodiac. In India, those are broken down to like four different ages, which are the Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Kali Yuga, and one more that escapes me at the moment. I'll come back to you on that one. We, the Satya Yuga is the what we consider to be the golden age, and the Kali Yuga is the dark ages. So we are now just emerging from the Kali Yuga, and in the Kemetic, we would be moving out of the, we're on the ascendant path of the moving out of the Piscean age into the Aquarian. Both are ages of density and consciousness. So, as humanity is moving from the dark ages into a more enlightened era, there is resistance from the dark, for it seeks to hold on to is control over circumstances. In like manner, that's symbolic of the cycle that goes on within us as we continuously incarnate, going through the birth and rebirth cycles, going through even the yearly cycles, which present an opportunity for ascension for us, particularly for those who have decided to embark on the spiritual path. And when we embark on the spiritual path, it is essentially the same thing as when the world is moving from the dark cycle and beginning a path into the light. It is symbolic of the same thing that goes on within us when we are moving out of our identification with our lower self, our ego, the darkness, and beginning a path of ascension into the light. The dynamics are the same. So what then occurs is as we begin that path of ascension, we have the resistance coming from the darkness. What that does in the grand scale, or how that manifests itself on the grand scale, is that, greetings, Kara and Chris, um, how that manifests on the global scale is that forces that have been preeminent during the dark period are in control of resources, the economy, politics. They represent the ego, if you will, of humanity as a whole. And so when humanity is moving on that path of ascension, we'll see that there is resistance because the dark forces of the egoic forces of humanity are desperate to hold on to and retain the control that it's had. It senses that it is losing its grip of control. So, what that manifests in is what we see and have seen unfolding, particularly since 9/11, when we've started to see the development of the surveillance state, a means to be able to monitor human activity out of the desperation that the dark forces of the earth have for control, to maintain and retain control. Similarly, as we go through our individual path of ascension, the ego, our lower self, the dark forces within us, also fight to retain its control and influence over us. So, the significance of the period that we are in now, the holy days, where in the cycle of the sun, where on December 22nd or 21st, it appears to be stationary for 3 days and 3 nights, and then it begins its upward path on the ecliptic, symbolic of the birth of the sun and its ascension on the path. And so the end of the year represents the birth of the sun, which is symbolic of the opportunity for us to be reborn and begin our path of ascension, or to rededicate ourselves to our path of ascension. So the end of the year represents a time for us to individually reflect on what has unfolded during the past year, to evaluate our experiences, whether they were positive or negative, to gain insight from them, go over the things that we didn't think went well, the challenges that we had, how we dealt with those things, and to recalibrate and reassess how to approach those type of challenges going forward, knowing what to avoid, what pitfalls to avoid and not to repeat, knowing what mistakes not to repeat. And then after having engaged in that type of reflection, we can effectively plan for the new year. We can reflect upon what our state of mind has been throughout the year and determine what the effect it has that has had on our external environment. And if we weren't pleased with the results, then we gained a lot of insight into how we can rechart our course for the coming year. It's time for us to be able to rededicate ourselves to our spiritual ascension, to reevaluate our goals, to understand ourselves better, to recognize that what we have been pursuing in order to be able to attain happiness has been an unfruitful effort, knowing that there's nothing that outside of us that can bring us happiness or peace. That has to be attained from within. Often the tendency is for individuals to find fault in others and to assess blame on others for how things are unfolding, how we are feeling. And in so doing, to avoid taking responsibility for our own circumstances, for our actions. And so we end up engaging in an excessive amount of finger pointing and nothing gets resolved. Recently, I was making the point that if we all made it a point to focus on holding ourselves accountable to adhering to the spiritual principles that we study and espouse, hold ourselves accountable for engaging in right action, right speech, right thought, then we will create not only better circumstances for ourselves, but we'll create better circumstances for humanity as a whole. Because the only thing that we can control is what we do. Seeking to try to control others or to try to give others advice, to try to hold other people accountable is a fruitless act. We can't control others. It's not our responsibility to control others. It's not our responsibility to attempt to hold someone else accountable. Ultimately, that responsibility falls upon each individual to hold themselves accountable. There's only, for us to choose properly in our associations with people. Ideally, we want to associate with people who are like-minded and do hold um, themselves accountable. But if we are on a path of ascension and we consider ourselves to be spiritual beings and spiritually inclined, then we are going to do more to influence people by setting a positive example, by living according to the principles that we study and espouse. That will have more of an impact than anything that we may be able to say to someone. So, the best impact that we can ever have is to hold ourselves to personal account for practicing spiritual principles, being of service to others, demonstrating love, compassion, selflessness. If we just hold ourselves to those ideals, we will improve the external circumstances. If we are mindful of what we focus on, we will create circumstances that are consistent with what we want rather than the things that we don't want. We often find people wanting to find a way to change the world, a lofty goal of changing the world. But we can only change the world when we first make it a point to change ourselves. We're always focused on wanting to try to change others and find fault with others. So the best thing that we can do is to set a positive example by adhering to the spiritual principles that are right and just, and demonstrating love, compassion, and selflessness, engaging in service to humanity. And sometimes that will involve us calling out injustices and engaging in actions to make a change. It is our responsibility to fight against injustice because we are part of the human drama. And I've mentioned before that spirituality is not an escape from life. It is a means for us to be able to use those principles in order to be able to navigate life more effectively. So we are compelled to call out injustice, and that's why, though this is a spiritual show, it's called Journey into Self, and we focus on spiritual development and ascension. And again, it's journey into self, not journey into others. It's journey into self, holding ourselves accountable for knowing ourselves better and getting in tune with ourselves. But because of the fact that spirituality is not an escape from life, we do address uh, the things that are going on in the external environment and bringing out awareness of the things that are occurring. Because, as I was pointing out, uh, the dark forces do seek to continue to control things, but darkness cannot operate in the light. And so we seek to bring these things to light, and so that we can have a positive effect on helping to move humanity out of the darkness and into the light. So I'm not going to go into a lot of analysis, although we live in we're moving in the cusp of the information age, and so there's more and more information coming out. And we'll continue on our series next week on uh, Trump outsider or establishment, with the release of the limited release of the Epstein files. And so a plethora of information is becoming available. And we saw today that Trump has announced that the U.S. government is going to be giving or allocating $8.6 billion to Israel to facilitate a contract with Boeing to build fighter jets for Israel using taxpayer dollars. It's debatable whether or not that is to be repaid because it's an appropriation of aid, basically, that's given to Israel. And so, we'll go into that at another time. But one of the themes that we have been developing in that regard is that the common thread that we've seen with those who are part of the so-called establishment, or the swamp, as the MAGA people would call it, has been a devotion to the interests of Israel, and that politicians have typically acquiesced to the demands of the Zionists, their lobbying group APAC, and so we see that that continues under the Trump administration, though he has espoused that he is operating outside of that. So again, when we see what's unfolding in the deepening of the commitments of the United States to uh, Israel and its Zionist controllers, we see that there's been no change. Um, that there's actually been um, something that's been deeper in terms of that connection and establishment. So we all have to be much more vigilant about doing research, accumulating knowledge, uh, putting to practice the things that we've learned, um, and knowing things for ourselves. We've become lazy, and as a result, have become too dependent upon external sources to inform us. So part of the personal responsibility is to take responsibility for what goes into one's mind. And that has been one of the things that has created the level of polarity that we see in humanity right now, is because people have acquiesced to being controlled by whatever type of media that they consume. And so there's always conflict given the talking points that are put forth by the different competing media outlets and whatever slant that they're inclined to. And people have become lazy and aren't inclined to do any of their own research. And that situation does not seem to be uh, pointing in a positive direction now with the advent of AI. And I may have our brother Siddiqui Bakari come on to discuss that, because he's been a pioneer uh, on AI for some time. But the advent of AI um, will only provide an opportunity for people to become that much more lazy and disinclined to actually do any research for themselves. So I want to basically just give this time to encourage people to take this time to engage in introspection and reflection, to go deeper into an understanding of ourselves. For the objective of all spiritual disciplines is for us to know ourselves. And in order for us to know ourselves, we have to gain insight into what compels us to do what we do, and to transcend from the illusion and identification of that being what we consider ourselves to be, who we consider ourselves to be. Because as long as we identify with that, we are confining ourselves, we are limiting ourselves, we are confining ourselves to what our ancestors referred to as a prison house of the soul. So we want to transcend that identification and become unlimited beings, to become in tune with our own divinity. And we do that by knowing ourselves and engaging in constant self inquiry and letting go of wanting to try to change others. When we seek to change others, we're deflecting our responsibility for our own selves. And that is the only responsibility that we really have, is to change ourselves, hold ourselves accountable. By us doing that, we will ensure our ascension and have a positive influence on the path of others by setting a positive example. So, if there's any questions, please put them in the chat, and I will encourage you to engage more in spiritual practices in the coming year, to spend more time in meditation, silence, because it's the constant working of the mind, the constant thoughts that are going through the mind that function as a barrier between us and divinity. So the more that we develop the ability to be able to control and still our minds, the more that we can become in tune with the infinite and be guided by the inner divine source within us. So with that, I thank you for tuning in. I hope that you found this to be beneficial, that you gained some insight from it, and that going forward, if we want to make a positive influence on the world, that starts with ourselves. We want to change our external environment. We need to change our internal environment. And when we do that, we will have a better world for ourselves individually and for humanity collectively. I say, peace. I have a question. After listening to a discussion today regarding how knowledge can lead one towards isolation, what are my thoughts? Hmm. It can, because in my observation that when we do begin a path of knowledge, whether it's particularly if it's spiritual knowledge, and particularly when we begin to practice it, it does become more lonely, if you will, because not everyone is embarking on a path of ascension. So the more that we climb that mountain of ascension, we see less people. We see people dropping off that mountain. We become more alone and isolated. The further that we tend to climb, because not everyone is dedicating to making that climb. So yeah, we can it can lead to isolation because we'll find that either we will have a more difficult time being able to relate to people, or more likely other people will have a more difficult time being able to relate to us. And I found that to be true um, for myself, because the more I've learned, um, the less inclined I am to mundane discussion. And though I can relate to people, people may have a more difficult time relating to me. And I may be more disinclined to engage in certain activities, or be around uh, certain things, right? Some of the things that um, I did in my youth, I don't do anymore. So yeah, I end up finding myself to be more isolated. So I think that's really just part of the spiritual path. I say. All right. So with that, thank you for joining on us here on Journey into Self. In the upcoming year, we will continue to do our analysis into world affairs, and we will also continue to provide some spiritual insight. So thank you for joining us on Journey into Self. We'll see you here next time. What's up?